With 8 days until the presidential election, a new survey of likely Wisconsin voters has Trump 1 point ahead of Harris in the key battleground state of Wisconsin and a slight lead there in New Hampshire. Now here to discuss is Blaze media critic Rob Eno, who's filling in for Matthew Peterson, and Justin Robert Young. He's the host of Politics podcast. So Justin, let's dive into these numbers because we know that they're within the margin of error right now. So can we give these polls any real weight at this stage?
Well, you know that with Wisconsin, any poll that shows anybody up more than a point is probably not going to happen because every election has been decided by within a point on either side of the aisle for the last several cycles. There is every indication to say that this is going to be just as close of an election as it was in 2020, as it was in 2016. What I would encourage people to do at this point, and obviously the polls are getting less and less relevant because early voting has already happened. But if you want to read this like many professionals do, don't look at the spread of what somebody is leading by. Instead, look at the vote share. If Kamala Harris is at 47% or below, that's where the Donald Trump campaign really, really wants them because Donald Trump is essentially a hard-capped 48% candidate. There's a lot of independents that have just turned off their opinions on whether or not they're going to vote for him. Maybe that changes this cycle. That'd be good for them, but I don't think that they're expecting it. So if you see Kamala Harris down in the 47s, that's where you're more looking at.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, it's also the trajectory seems to have been going towards Trump, right? And that Harris is below other places where she's been, especially with like African-American voters and things like that. I saw something today that said that she's spending the last week of the campaign, which is mind-boggling to me, on Black podcasts and urban radio stations for interviews. Do you think that they feel like they're hurting in that type of, with that vote, that they need to go get what should have been, sealed for 2 generations years ago?
Literally, as I was waiting to come on here, I saw a social media clip of Kamala Harris on Shannon Sharp's Club Shay Shay podcast, which some of your viewers might know as the place where Cat Williams went on for 3 hours in a wild interview that touched on a bunch of different extraordinarily taboo subjects. And instead they have Shannon Sharp literally reading off cards so he doesn't screw up the pre-written questions so Kamala Harris can get to her talking points. No, it's not a good sign for her to be trying to shore up, and not specifically the black vote, the black male vote, very specifically. They are very much worried about that. If you're going to steelman the argument, though, you would say, okay, they already have their solid 45%, maybe a little bit less than that is going to vote for her. These are true blue Democrats no matter what. They have spent a lot of time on the trail with Liz Cheney to try to get Never Trumpers, some of that Haley protest vote. And now what they want to do is try to shore up what they see might be deficiencies, places where that the Trump campaign has been trying to eat away at their base. That would be the glass half full argument for the Harris campaign. But I wouldn't say that it's ridiculous to say, well, maybe this is a major problem, because if there is tremendous attrition with the black male vote, it's not just a problem for Kamala Harris. It's a problem for the Democratic Party going forward.
All right, so that's what's happening with Kamala Harris. Now, if you look at Donald Trump, he has absolutely dominated this news cycle. You go back to last Sunday with him at McDonald's, and then he was on Rogan. I mean, everybody on Friday night, it was like a shared experience that we don't get anymore, but everybody was staying up and watching Donald Trump on Joe Rogan. And then you have Madison Square Garden, right? The rally. Everybody was still tuning in. Last I saw, it was 34 million that were tuning in to that rally across all of the different platforms. Does Trump have enough of this momentum right now to carry him to victory?
There's no doubt that this election is about Donald Trump, and both campaigns want it that way. We're going to find out which of the campaigns is right for that to be the case next Tuesday and possibly a few days afterward. But you're absolutely correct to say that the Trump campaign has orchestrated the media availability for this campaign to a T. That they have been able to make this as big as possible. And the Harris campaign has not been particularly interested with a very few exceptions, of taking the attention away from Trump. Even today, you have this gigantic news cycle pointing out the things that they don't like about Donald Trump's MSG rally, while in the background, it is just baked in for the viewer that a Republican went into Midtown Manhattan and sold out Madison Square Garden, which is something that very rarely happens.
Yeah, people are focusing on that Tony Hinchcliffe Puerto Rico joke, right, as the big thing. But what's interesting is Tony Hinchcliffe, I looked it up, has 22 million podcast views in the past month. He goes after young men, which have historically gone for Democrats. So to me, it seems like it's additive. I think that anybody that's offended by that joke already wasn't voting for Donald Trump, but I'm not sure if you see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, Senator Rick Scott of Florida, who's up for re-election, where there's a lot of Puerto Ricans that live, especially on that I-4 corridor that's always crucial. He apologized and said that he didn't like the joke. The Trump campaign itself has said that the joke does not necessarily comport with their values. Not only is Tony Hinchcliffe popular, his Kill Tony podcast played Madison Square Garden. So there is certainly that argument to say this is exactly what we are fighting against if you are the Trump campaign. This is not PC culture run amok. Sometimes you have to have a comedian go out there and say comedian things. The argument I would say against it is this. Anybody who's been to a Trump rally knows, and I've been to several to cover them, it's kind of a solemn event. Yes, people are there to have fun. Yes, they like it when Trump makes jokes, but it's not particularly a comedy club atmosphere or a roast atmosphere for anybody but Trump. And so I do think that Hinchcliffe probably got in a little over his skis just in terms of a tough room situation. And certainly for anybody who wants to look at it in a negative light, if you already believe that Donald Trump is running a racist campaign, then somebody calling Puerto Rico a floating pile of trash is probably going to further cement that. But ultimately, I don't know if any of that matters as much as a Republican sold out Madison Square Garden with 8 days to go before the election. I think ultimately that's really the big headline here.
Yeah, and Justin, they're mad about that. So, of course, what are they going to do? They're going to go back and say, hey, there was a pro-Nazi rally there in 1939. Let's go ahead and watch MSNBC and Tim Walz making this comparison.
That jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling. Because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners.
I look at this and I say, okay, we have to go back to the Nazis, right? At 1939. To make a comparison to something that Donald Trump is doing in 2024, right? Like there are multiple Israeli flags there, Justin.
Did you know that 21 years after that 1939 rally, there was a presidential candidate who held a rally in Madison Square Garden with the tagline, "Get America Moving Again"? That was John F. Kennedy, who held a rally in Madison Square Garden. Look, obviously, this is the closing argument for the Kamala Harris campaign, is that Donald Trump is a dangerous, unhinged, unchecked fascist that is going to destroy the country and democracy in general. We will see whether or not that's effective. If I were involved in their campaign, I would spend less time using my resources to direct attention to obvious Donald Trump wins, and I would do more to maybe get myself on stage with Taylor Swift during the Eras Tour and change the narrative about where the momentum in this election is going. Because I do think that part of this for them is that Kamala Harris is not a known quantity. She's not Joe Biden. She's not Barack Obama. She's somebody that's been microwaved into the consciousness that a lot of hardcore partisans immediately, obviously, were very excited about. But if you look at into the people that you really need to excite, I do think that you do need to show that them leaving their house is going to be worthwhile. And that's what I would worry about when the campaign is totally tilted toward who she's not. You got to wonder if the marginal voters even know who she is.
Yeah, you said something that earlier that really stuck in my mind. In 2010, I was in Massachusetts and very heavily helped Scott Brown win that Kennedy seat, right? And the entire election was Scott Brown saying, I will be the 41st vote to stop Obamacare, and Martha Coakley, his opponent, saying he will be the 41st vote to stop Obamacare. Which was his winning message, right? So it's like this Nazi thing and the focus on Trump. It's insane to me. And the Democrats are now warning Kamala Harris. Michael Schellenberger had a tweet a little while ago, right before we came on, of a Washington Post story where the Washington Post is saying these Democratic get out the vote groups are telling her to stop it because it's not working. And it's odd that they keep doing it. And she doesn't say who she is.
I have a theory that there are certain words, like Lyndon Baines Johnson had this rule that he didn't want anything in his speech that was more than 2 syllables. He wanted very simple, plainly communicated speeches because he knew that these college-educated speechwriters would use words that communicated within their environment, but maybe not to the people of Texas for whom he was representing, and then eventually as vice president. I think that fascist is a bit of a Frasier word. Like a word that Frasier and his brother would talk to each other about, and then they'd cut to the dad, and the dad would be watching football, and that would be the joke. It's something that specifically college-educated people react to, and history-focused people react to, but it doesn't have a lot of kitchen table agency. Unless you explain why the fascist government is affecting you, why a thing that you want to do will now be blocked, then you have a harder time with just the wide, broad brush. Even if you want to paint Donald Trump as an anti-democratic threat, you need to spell out the actual real world harms for the voter right now. Because the trust me bro stuff, I don't think has the same purchase power as I want to fix the border or I want to get inflation under control in a 60-30 wrong track, right track environment.
Right. And the thing that they're saying that he's fascist about is wanting to get the border under control, which is what they're voting on.
Yeah, I mean, there's no end to where and why and how and when Donald Trump is fascist. The other thing that I would worry about it from an advocacy perspective is just how many times we run this one.
Right.
We ran it in 2016, didn't work, close, but no cigar. 2020, you got over the hill, but also that's COVID and Donald Trump was the president. So you're able to run against the current administration where people thought things were going wrong because there was a lot of death and economic despair in the air. But now you're defending the fort.
Yep.
So
Justin, the way that it looks is when they go out there and they say Trump is a fascist, he's not going to give up power. Well, guess what? He gave up power and now he's running again. And so at some point, the arguments just don't ring true anymore. But we'll take 90s TV references every time you come on, Justin. Thanks so much for your time today.